Happy to talk Indiana with this guy. Haven't talked Indiana football against Illinois in a while. Dustin Dopirak, he's a long time covered Indiana athletics. He is the beat writer for the Bloomington Herald-Times and the Indianapolis Star. It's been almost 9 years since Illinois football has gone over to Indiana. What's happened since then, Dustin?
I mean, I was only there for part of it, but a lot. I mean, a lot has happened just a lot of rise and fall just in the recent years. Obviously going from 8-5 in 2019 and going to the Gator Bowl and almost winning it. 2020 in the crazy pandemic year, going 6-1 in the league before they lost in the Outback Bowl. And then last year, just falling off the face of the earth and going 2-10. So, a lot, and yet it's still, you look back and say, I don't know what to expect from this Indiana team. You can't look at it and say, well, this is definitely going to be a top 5 team in the league. Really, a whole bunch of outcomes seem possible for this group as far as high and low end, because you're just trying to figure out, okay, what is this Indiana program? Is it closer to what it was in 2019 and 2020, or is it really just what it was last year? And we're only going to begin to find that out tomorrow night or Friday night.
I think anybody rational would say, hey, that was the worst case scenario last year, right?
Sure.
And you're probably a better program than that, given what Tom Allen's done, even his first couple of years, right? Getting 5 wins isn't something to laugh at. Indiana, it's kind of like Illinois. It's a tough job. So what did happen last year, Dustin? Like how did it go so bad?
So much. I mean, I think injuries were obviously the big obvious point to it that you can look at it and circle and say, okay, well, you lose Michael Penix against Penn State. He never seemed right in the first place, just coming off the ACL the previous year. He seemed physically okay, but just didn't seem sharp at any point, and then he injures his shoulder and he's out. And then Jack Tuttle plays a couple games and he wasn't playing particularly well, but he throws a touchdown pass against Ohio State and he's out. So then you're throwing in Donovan McCulley, who's a really terrific athlete, but true freshman who hadn't been there in the spring because he wanted to stick around and play on a basketball team that went to the state finals. So you're digging deep by late October into your third string quarterback, who again is a true freshman with 0 experience. And you saw injuries on the other side. I mean, basically you ended up once they got past their starting running back, they were dealing with walk-ons there. They had some wide receivers dinged up. But more, I think a bigger issue was defense, especially in the secondary. Really saw a lot of guys get hurt. Tywan Mullen was a preseason All-American, was All-American in 2020. And I think he played 3 games before he was injured up. Indeed, Devon Matthews gets hurt, first game of the season, and he was out for a little while. And they really ended up just digging into that depth back there and never just really got right, especially in the secondary, which was really supposed to be a strength of theirs, a place where they'd been really, really good the year before. They had 3 guys who were all Big Ten. But there was more. I think there was just they did not handle expectations well. I think one thing that was really good about the 2020 team, I think Mitchell Page, a former wide receiver, pointed this out to Zach Osterman in a story he wrote that year. He said, basically when I was at IU, it really bothered us who was in the stands. He said, these guys don't care. Like they'll play you in the parking lot. Like that's their deal. Like and that's how they were able to really just continue to get jacked up in 2020 when there was nobody in the stands. And this group seemed to, in 2021, they seemed to just get too into the idea that they were preseason top 25. They were supposed to do things Indiana teams had never done before. And there were guys who were thinking about the NFL and guys who would come back just for the purpose of building their NFL resume. And when things started to go sideways, they started to think about that, instead of thinking about, trying to get things right or trying to just win a couple games or just trying to find some level of success. It was like, okay, well, I'm just going to keep myself from getting hurt. I think the guys called themselves out for that, each other out for that. Some of the returners, but even some guys that left who said, they literally went into Tom Allen's office and said basically we just didn't feel like there was enough accountability. We're not sure what you saw and what you didn't see, but this is what we saw. We saw guys checking out basically. And so I think there was just a lot that snowballed. I mean, again, they go down 14-0 in the first minute and a half, 2 minutes against Iowa. And it was like, okay, all of a sudden everything was already kind of crashing down. And I think they just really never recovered. So a lot went on that was uncontrollable, that was injury, but some also was guys failing to meet the standard. What is a very high standard that they had set. I mean, this was really one of the feel-good programs in college football going into last year. But it just seemed like when things went south, there were a lot of guys that did not answer the bell.
Yeah. Well, Tom Allen makes some changes right after that. We'll get into Walt Bell and Tom Allen kind of taking back over the defense, which he's been pretty good at. But let's address the quarterback in this opener. They had a quarterback competition. Illinois did. Here at Illinois, it's pretty clear Tommy DeVito was always going to be the starting quarterback. On paper, I would think Connor Bazelak, given his history at Missouri, given that Jack Tuttle, when he's played, hasn't had great numbers. But it seems like most people around there, at least some people I talked to, they don't know, even though Tom Allen and the rest of the team know. So what's your read on the quarterback situation?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's tough. It's tougher than I expected it to be. And I think that there is a lot of logic. I mean, I think if you're looking at it from outside, if you're, like a fan of any other program and you're like, okay, well, who do you think is going to play quarterback in Indiana? Well, one guy's thrown for 5,000 yards in his career. The other guy's thrown for 800. So I think would be the guy that threw for 5,000. That seems like an obvious move to make. But I mean, Tuttle has done some things that I think matter to Tom Allen that have kept him in this position. I don't know that he won it. I mean, because it is done. Or at least I believe Tom Allen when he says that it's done. That he made the decision last week after the second scrimmage and after giving those guys basically, pretty equal snaps over the course of 2 full scrimmages, felt like he had enough data to make the decision and wanted to have 2 full weeks of practice in which everybody knew who the guy was. So I believe him when he says the decision has been made and they've just done a good job of not leaking it. They haven't told us and nobody else has leaked it. So I still would lean that if you ask me, okay, Dustin, if you had to lay money down on it, who do you think is going to be the quarterback on Friday? I would still say Bazelak. But the fact that I'm not sure tells you that Tuttle's done some things well, and among them really is leadership. I think, as I mentioned, basically a lot of the guys determined after last season that, man, it just can't happen again. This is all the issues that we have. They had a meeting the next morning after they got housed 44-7 by Purdue, basically already on the bus. They were talking about like, okay, we got to talk with Coach Allen. So this is like Micah McFadden, Cam Jones, Jalen Williams, and some other veteran defensive guys. But Tuttle was a guy who decided, basically like the first week of spring semester, when they got back on campus in January, to develop a PowerPoint presentation, basically telling the rest of the guys, this is what the expectation is going to be. Like, this is what we're going to demand from you in terms of your presence. You need to be locked into this team, and we're not going to accept, B-list effort on practice or anything like that. And this is what's going to be expected from you, outside of practice. He called Cam Jones up and said, I want you to deliver this with me. That was, I think, something that mattered to Tom Allen. And he said there was 3 things, the 3 main criteria. One was going to be just knowing the offense, putting the offense together. Obviously, that's both kind of on even footing with a new coordinator with Walt Bell. But then said, I want a guy who's not going to turn the ball over. But I also want somebody who's going to command the respect of his teammates. I want the guy that these guys look at and say, he's going to make plays for us. He's going to move the ball for us. He's going to conduct this offense the way that it should be conducted. So I think Tuttle did a lot of things in that regard. On the flip side, I think Bazelak probably at the end of the day has, I don't want to say the physical tools, because like Tuttle's got an arm. I mean, you forget, like Tuttle was a 4-star recruit, elite 11 guy out of high school in California, went to Utah first. He's got a lot of the raw stuff, but like Bazelak, one thing Allen really pointed out, and then when he says it and then you see it, you're like, I get it now. He says he throws a really catchable ball, which like it's one of the things that's like hard to quantify, but like their completion percentage, it's like 66 Bazelak to 55 Tuttle in their careers, in their playing careers. And Bazelak does like he kind of reminds you of like the bigger kid on your block that you made go play all-time quarterback when you and your friends wanted to play on the street. Yep. He reminds you of that kid, like the way he makes sure you can catch the football. He makes sure that, and that's important. It's just like getting the ball in the hands of playmakers and getting them going. He's got that kind of look to him because he's a bigger dude. He's like 6'3", 225, just a touch huskier than Tuttle is. Tuttle made a point to lose some weight, but just seems to, put it on the money where it's supposed to be, to give you a chance to catch it and run with it. It's not like you're not watching him doing crazy things with his arm, like, wow, how can anybody throw it that far? But just seems to put it where it's supposed to be to make it easy for the guy to catch and run. And I think that matters. So for that reason, I lean Bazelak just because I kind of seen him. We don't get to see a lot. They didn't let us watch a whole lot of 11 on 11. But that's the thing that stands out that makes me lean Bazelak. But I am not sure because Tuttle has done enough to keep himself in this discussion and not have it be a runaway deal.
Yeah, just for Illinois fans, both those guys, former 4-star prospects. So talent doesn't seem to be an issue there. All right. So Walt Bell comes in. He's got Big Ten experience in Maryland. It's interesting because Ryan Walters, the DC at Illinois, knows Bazelak from Missouri. Andy Boo, the Illinois linebackers coach, was the DC when Walt Bell was the OC at Maryland. So both these guys know each other pretty well. But how does Walt Bell change this offense? What's it going to look like when they unveil it?
Yeah, I mean, I think a couple things that that you can derive that I can imagine will be an issue, and we've only seen so much of this so far, or not an issue, but a characteristic of a Walt Bell offense. I mean, he's big on tempo because that's kind of how he was sort of coached up as a coach. Basically, his main mentor is Blake Anderson, who's the head coach at Utah State, had been the head coach at Arkansas State when Walt Bell was there, and Anderson was his position coach, was Bell's position coach when Bell played as a slot wide receiver at Middle Tennessee State. So they like tempo, and Bell in particular likes to run the football. And obviously they're a spread offense. He's a guy that likes to go wide and fast, but does still like his guys, to be able to push it, to be able to run the ball a lot. His Arkansas State teams, which probably his best statistical performances as an offensive coordinator, was about 14-15, where I think they won the Sun Belt both years. Those teams ran the ball really, really well. And they had a quarterback that could really run it, Freddie Knight, and was a really talented kid there. But they had just sort of multiple running backs that they could get the ball and push it that way. But they're going to want to play fast, and that's that's going to be interesting to see if they can keep up tempo and get, especially their linemen, used to it, being able to get down, snap the ball fast when it's called for. They're going to use a lot of wide receivers. Bell says he wants to play 8 or 9 in a game. And they've got a lot. They feel really good about their guys. It's one of those interesting things where when you see them in practice, you're like, I can see it. And you might get on, in a game and say, those guys aren't nearly as impressive as you think. But, they have a lot of guys they like there. They feel like they can trust. Cam Camper, they really like, a junior college kid. They're a huge fan of what they've seen from him. Really late blooming kid. He was barely recruited out of high school in Texas, but went to JUCO and grew like 6 inches after college, somewhere, or 6 inches after high school. I don't know. His high school coach said he was 5'9" when he played, and he's 6'2", 6'3" now. They like Donovan McCulley, who they moved to wide receiver. They like his talent a lot. They like the 2 slot guys that they have. DJ Matthews come back from an ACL tear, and Emery Simmons, but and they really like some young guys as well. They really like Omar Cooper, is going to be a true freshman. Malachi Holt Bennett, who's a true sophomore. They like what they've seen from Javon Swinton. They like a lot of those guys. So they're going to play a lot of tempo. And just, again, the running game hasn't been good for a while. I mean, even the 2020 team, they were good in picking up short yardage with Stevie Scott, but they didn't run that well collectively. And so Walt Bell really, really wants to fix that. I mean, he believes in having a team that they can run the ball even when they're going to run it. So that's going to be the goal anyway, is going to be the point, is just try to get the running game right, play more tempo. He wants wide receivers also to play with creativity. That's one thing that they've kind of made a point of saying, is that he wants wide receivers to manage their grasp. What that means is just knowing how to improvise around. Yeah, basically. And that's kind of a thing they've noticed, that they've had more freedom to improvise on routes, to find where the opening actually is, as opposed to just running exactly where it's supposed to go. Basically have some have quarterbacks and receivers be able to communicate and know, okay, there's going to be opening there. You're supposed to run a slant, but maybe you turn that into a hook or whatever, or you shorten up the slant stop or something like that, so that you find what's actually there instead of just running you into defenders. So that, I think, is going to be interesting what that actually looks like. It's never as drastic as how they talk about it. It sounds like it's just going to be a total free for all, and it's going to be like, again, like street ball, where you just the guy says hut and you just run wherever you have to shake the guy, that's defending you. It's not gonna be like that, obviously. But it's going to add another wrinkle to it. So those are, I think, kind of the key things in terms of what we've heard of what Walt Bell wants to do on offense. And so, he might change that to account for what he thinks Tom Allen wants, because he really views it as, I'm not the head coach, the head coach of the offense. I'm Tom Allen's offensive coordinator, so it's my job to do what he wants. But I think those are some things that I think Allen wants this offense to do, because he obviously wants some drastic changes to what they did last year.
Yeah, you mentioned some of the playmakers there. I know they added a couple running back transfers, including Sean Shivers from Auburn. But I want to ask you about the trenches, because that's an area that Brett Bielema obviously prides himself on is the trenches, and Illinois took big steps on the defensive line and obviously had a good offensive line last year. So where's Indiana at with their guys in the offensive line and the defensive line?
Well, on offense, they are not a lot different in terms of their guys, and they didn't, to the dismay of many IU fans, they did not make a change there as far as coaching was concerned. There were many that were calling for that because they just did not feel like that group performed well, and frankly, it had less reason to underperform than a lot of other groups because they were mostly healthy. Comparatively, most of I think one of their starters missed more than one game. I think that's it. So they didn't perform particularly well, considering that they had that benefit. They're talking as if they've improved, but it's a lot of the same guys. It's Luke Haggard at left tackle, Matthew Bedford, who's probably their most talented offensive lineman, has moved from guard out to tackle, so he'll be on the right side. The interior positions, they've not been necessarily declarative in terms of who's going to play, but I think it's going to be Zach Carpenter, the Michigan transfer at center, Mike Kadick at left guard, and they've talked a lot about Khalil Benson, so I think he's going to be the guy who's going to be at right guard, and that's the only real new name. They feel really good about him. He's a redshirt sophomore. So they say they're better. They say they're improving. They say their technique is better. They say that they're holding each other accountable. All these kinds of things. Is that true? I won't know until I see it, and I won't believe it until I see it necessarily. I mean, it is the same group of guys, and it's the one area where that they didn't really extensively address through the transfer market. It might be the only position group outside of maybe tight end and obviously that's a smaller group. You're only putting one guy out there most of the time. But I think at almost every other position group, they got somebody who was a Division I FBS and probably Power 5 transfer. And, they've got the one transfer they got on the offensive line is Division II guy named Parker Hanna from West Texas A&M, who they like, but I think is a second string guy. And I don't know if you'll see him make an impact on this year's team. So, they're not going to be a drastically different group. So they just have to way outperform what they were. They just have to hope that last year's experience makes a difference. A lot of guys are going to have had game experience. Haggard, Bedford all have. Carpenter got a little last year, more at Michigan his previous year. Cater got a bunch last year. Benson's going to be a new guy, presuming he wins that job. And I think he did. But there's going to be a lot of experience, but it's not, it's not a ton of good experience, and it needs to be, they need to be able to create some holes and maybe protect their quarterback, because they didn't do either one of those things last year. On the flip side of that, on the defensive side, they did address, they went out and got a lot more length, got 3 really important transfers. I think J.H. Tevis was a defensive end to Cal, and Patrick Lucas and Ladarius Cox, 2 transfers from Ole Miss, 2 really, really big guys from Ole Miss that they're going to add to that group. And they still have, some guys coming back that they really like. DeMarcus Elliott, Cio Nofogo Tataola, I think is his name. Samoan guy. I'm sure I butchered that. So Cio, if you happen to come across this, I apologize.
Go ahead.
But all the same, they've always felt good about those guys. Feel really good about what they've got out from James Head this year, as a guy who didn't get to play much last year and wasn't really healthy when he did, but the year before he was pretty productive. So they feel good about the depth they have at the 3 down spots. And they've also kind of turned, the weak side defensive end, and they call it the bull. It's a little bit of an outside linebacker defensive end hybrid, where that guy drops back as much as he pass rushes, or close to it or whatever. They want a guy in a stand-up spot, and they feel really good about what they're getting there. They brought in a transfer, Miles Jackson, who they really like from UCLA. That didn't have great numbers there, but they really, really like him. But they also Alfred Lance Bryant, who's a returning starter there. They feel great about how he developed. Basically, Jackson was on his heels just from the time he got in the door. And they said it's made Bryant a lot better. I mean, he trimmed up, got rid of some body fat, moving a lot faster, feels a lot better about what he's doing. So they feel like they've got 2 really good guys at that edge bull position. So all there, they think they are better. Now, it should be noted, I don't think any of those guys that I mentioned had a sack last year. I think all the defensive line sacks came from Ryder Anderson and Weston Kramer, both of whom were guys who were 1-year transfers coming in for their last year of eligibility last year. I think Ryder Anderson was just cut by the Giants the other day, and Kramer, I think, is in the Canadian Football League now. But 2 guys they really, really liked, and they're gone. So they obviously have to replace that production. And that's not going to be enough. They need more than what they had from those guys. So they have to step up, get production on top of production, but just more from those guys than they've had. So they, again, ultimately, I think they feel pretty good on the defensive line. But they haven't had proven production at Indiana for many of those guys. So some guys are gonna have to step up and be playmakers more than they have been in recent seasons.
Yeah, Indiana certainly hit the transfer portal. 13 guys, I believe, and as you said, most of them Power 5 guys. So the back 7, I know last year maybe is the outlier, but they got good players. You mentioned Devin Matthews, Jalen Williams, Tywan Mullen, Cam Jones, returning linebacker, a captain. But I'm interested in your thoughts on Tom Allen kind of taking back control of the defense, right? Like, what do you think that means for the Indiana defense?
A couple big things, and it was interesting that I was able to drag this out of him when I asked at the end of November. Basically, they really prided themselves on havoc through 2020. And I think they were, and I just did this stat because I just wrote a story about it, but they were, I think, 2nd in the country in interceptions in 2020, despite the fact that they only played 8 games, and they were top 15 in sacks, top 15 overall in turnovers caused. And then last year they were in the bottom 30 in all of those. Basically, they were 100 or worse in all of those categories. So that's drastic. And obviously that tells you that there was a big difference in approach. And, Carlton Warren was a defensive coordinator, but he was running Allen's system. Basically he didn't run anything that Allen didn't have in there. It's just what he leaned toward. And I kind of asked him about that, how do you explain just the just total drop off? And this was obviously before he left. So this was like last November. And he said, Indiana really played a lot of zone vision, almost all zone vision last year. And we did a lot more man concepts this year. And so I think Allen is going to run a lot more zone stuff. But I think more to the point, he's trying to get mentality in the guys to try to create more turnovers. But as far as he's concerned, it's being willing to get beat, give up some chunks here and there, but keep everybody's eyes on the football and have the possibility of a big play every time, have the possibility of a tipped pass that somebody else can run and go get, because the one thing he mentioned was, if you're in man and you're locked in, well, actually Brandon Shelby mentioned this, the cornerback's coach, if you're locked in on your man, and the ball's tipped up in the air, you're not going to make a play on that. Right. You're just going to follow your man out for the rest of the route, and that ball is going to fall on the ground, and still it's a good play for the guy that knocked it down, but could be an interception. It could be a gain. It could be a situation where you either score yourself or set your, team up for, with a short field. And he wants more of that. That's not to say they're never going to run man, but, especially, sure the corners will more frequently, but they'll have, safeties, spending more time in some zones, linebacker more time in some zones to put themselves in the position where they've got the ability to, make a play on the football, watch what the quarterback's doing, and react and adjust and go break on the ball. And so I think that's what you're going to see more of. Now, that might lead to giving up some things in other ways. That might you might be giving up, the kind of little chunk plays, 5-10 yard stuff that you do when you're in a zone, basically, that where if someone can figure out where the openings are, they can, kind of, nickel and dime you to death. But it's just believing in, blitzing more from, the Husky spot, or blitzing more with safeties, or just bringing rushes from different parts, of the defense, and keeping guys on their heels, and keeping defenses on their heels. And, again, he's willing to roll the dice. He's willing to, he wants to go back to that, just more chance taking on defense. And he's also he says he's simplified it, is another thing, that basically they piled up a lot of checks last year in the defense, and feels like maybe it slowed him down. That basically was asking for them to think too much. Not that they're not going to get the answer eventually, but while they're coming up and say, okay, when he does this, I'm supposed to do that, it slows them down. Like, even if they eventually know what the right answer is, like it's slowing them down. They're not moving fast enough, and they're not just attacking. He wants them to be just, violent, aggressive attack, just not have to think nearly as much as they did a season ago. So I think those were going to be the big areas. He's done this, he's taken the plays back, but he doesn't have the coordinator title. Like, he actually gave someone else the coordinator title in Chad Wilt. And when I tell you, like, Chad is a Tom Allen clone, it's freaky. Like, it's like, I mean, like, he doesn't, it's not as freaky as like Tom's son Thomas, who was just playing there. Like, Thomas looks like Tom. You're like, oh my God, like this, he's going to look just like his dad, But like, Chad is like that same kind of like hyperactive, positive all the time. Like, got all kind of, like sayings. He's literally, like, I did a big feature on him. He's got like all these Post-it notes, like over top of his laptop, like on a shelf overhanging, that are like, just all these inspirational sayings written up. He's got quotes he's got a quote from Nipsey Hussle, but he's got all this other stuff in there that's very like, but he's just into that stuff. Like, and he is the truest of true believers. He is not faking. Like, he is like, power of positivity and leadership and all this stuff. I mean, it is not, it's not cynical at all. Like, he really believes, and that's Tom Allen. Like, those, like, there are, I think, a lot of guys who was like, if you just read Tom Allen's quotes, you'd be like, okay, he's one of these, he's one of these guys. But like Tom, like, the sincerity is very real in Tom Allen, and it is in Chad Wilt. And you're like, man, like, I get, like, they're going to get along wonderfully because they're basically the same guy. Yeah. So, like that, Wilt is going to organize the defense. He's going to run the meetings. He's going to do a lot of the film watching, stuff like that. Allen is not going to add to his hours that much, which is reason why he stopped being coordinator in the first place, is that was taking away too much of his head coaching time. And he's made it so that Wilt can be the point man on a lot of things. But on game day, Allen's the guy who makes the call on when it comes to plays. And that's just what he wanted back, just to get a little bit more power and control over it, so it was going the way he wants to go. I imagine there will come a time when Wilt gets that, when that's bequeathed to him, but Allen, I think, just really feels like he needs to take control of this thing and get it right, because in his mind, his program is not going to be successful if his defense is not successful. He was hired because he was a great defensive coach. He got promoted out of that job, and it's like, if the defense isn't right, then the whole program isn't going to be right. That's how Allen views it. So it's like, okay, I got, if you want something right, do it yourself, sort of thing. And that's kind of where Allen is right now.
All right, Dustin, last one I got for you, and great insight as always in Indiana. This is obviously a huge game for both programs, right? I mean, these are two programs that, I know Indiana's had their uptick here, but two programs still looking to kind of find their stability in the Big Ten and kind of rise up this rank, and a winnable game for both of them, but early in the season. Illinois has the advantage of getting maybe the rust out and having a game and evaluating itself, but Indiana also gets to evaluate Illinois while it's kept its stuff secret. What do you think of this matchup, and what does this game mean for the Hoosiers?
I mean, it's a very interesting matchup, just because it could literally go either way. And, I think Illinois got some sort of proven strengths that I'm waiting to see if Indiana can match and can deal with. I mean, Chase Brown obviously was just terrific on Saturday against Wyoming. He's coming off a 1,000-yard season. You're like, okay, like, he could just flat run over them. I mean, like the way that he performed, you're like, okay, that is a guy that could really bust you up. And DeVito seems to really fit what they need. Just was really smart about distributing the football, involving a lot of guys, getting the ball to playmakers in space, getting Brown involved in the passing game. And so, I think you saw a lot of good news for Illinois on Saturday. And, I don't think I even realized until I saw the numbers and then kind of looked back and said, okay, well, actually, this does check out how good Illinois' pass defense is. I mean, they're coming off a year where they were, first in the league in that category. I think in at least in conference games, if I'm not mistaken, it was one of the better, in the total conference in pass defense. I think that's what it was. It was 4 passing touchdowns in conference play.
Yeah,
that's terrific.
I think one over the last 6 games they played.
Yeah, I mean, so that's tough, man. I mean, and I know they lost a couple guys, but I think they still bring 3 starters back. I mean, so that's major. And so Indiana has to prove with a new quarterback either way, even if it's Tuttle, he's started maybe 3 games, 4 games in his career, and or Bazelak, whoever gets that job, it's a new quarterback. It's 2 to 3 new wide receivers from who was playing at the end of the year. New running back, new tight end. I mean, AJ Barner was kind of the heir apparent to Peyton Hendershot last year. You kind of knew he was going to be the guy, but still, almost all of their skill position guys are new, and they're going to be facing one of the best pass defenses in the conference, and in one of the better defensive conferences. So, can they throw the ball on this team? It's going to be an interesting question. And they're going to need to be successful throwing the ball if they're going to beat anybody. So Illinois is going to challenge them right out of the gate. There's a high bar, for what they're going to be able to do, and it's going to be really testing them. Are they good enough, or will they find themselves in a very similar position to one they were in last year? So it's big for Indiana for that reason. I mean, again, they have the advantage of having seen this, but that doesn't make it. It helps to know what you're up against. But when you're up against is really, really good, it doesn't make it any worse. The pass defense isn't going to be any easier to deal with. Now that they've seen it on tape. So it's huge for them because they've really got to get started. I mean, you look at their schedule and just, being in the Big Ten East, it is brutal for Indiana because
tough distance, man.
Yeah, it's just there's nothing especially with Michigan State coming back. When they had Michigan State down, that was somebody they could take advantage of. I mean, Michigan State was bad for a minute. Michigan, the team they beat in 2020 was bad. But man, Mel Tucker got it going quick. And so, obviously lose Kenneth Walker. Kenneth Walker was a big, big deal, but they still got some dudes. I mean, Jaden Reed, a wide receiver, and just getting that defense right is a big deal. So you got to look at it if you're Indiana and say, well, there's 4 losses right out of the gate. 8-4 is your absolute 100% ceiling. Then you got Cincinnati, who obviously lost a bunch of their, really Cincinnati lost generational players. Yeah. So you have to presume there's going to be a drop off there. But, how bad can they be, man? I mean, they're preseason top 25. There's still some dudes over there. And so, that you're probably going to lose that game. So you're 7-5 almost right out of the gate. So you got to find a way to get 6 wins out of this one, Western Kentucky, Idaho, Nebraska, Maryland, Rutgers. Maryland's not going to be easy for them. Nebraska's not going to be easy for them. And Purdue sure as heck isn't going to be easy for them. I mean, Purdue, Purdue lost some big guys, but Purdue's got a chance. Purdue's going to be a competitive team in the Big Ten West, I think. And so, you can't sit there and hope you get to 5 thinking that you can get Purdue in the bucket game at the end of the year. You can't. If you're thinking bowl season for this team, you absolutely have to win this game. And, you want to have some kind of proof that everything you did in the off season, not you always need this, in the opening game, but that you got to see progress. You got to believe that, okay, all of your adjustments mentally, psychologically, every way that you approach the season different made a dent, made an impact. And so if they lose this game, they're going to have a hard time, keeping that. I mean, if they lose it bad, especially, if they lose it close, that's one thing you can, live and say, okay, well, this play happened and that play happened. We're not that far away. If they get beat up, if they get bulldozed up front and Chase Brown runs for 200 or whatever, they're going to have a hard time getting off the mat. So, it's a big deal for them to, Didn't sneeze. Had to. Thought I was going to. But it's going to be an important deal for them to just show that they're a better football team, just show that they're competitive. But winning it is a big deal. I mean,
yeah,
they're behind the eight. Whoever loses this game is behind the eight ball.
Yep. Huge one for Illinois. If you start 2-0, they haven't won back-to-back games under Brett Bielema, right? And just to get a third of the way through to a bowl game would be huge for this team. So excited to see it. Excited to see Memorial Stadium in Bloomington for the first time in a while here, Dustin. But great insight.
It's different than the last time you saw it. It's boxed in now. Yeah.
I know.
Both sides are closed up now. So
yeah, can't wait to see it. Dustin, appreciate the insight as always, man. I'll see you on Friday night.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on. Looking forward to see you out here, man.